I had been bidding on open space properties all over the county and always came in second. They told me I may have come in much lower than that, but I found out that this farmer was failing and wanted to get out of the lease. So I was able to get a sublease on this, so I got my foot in the door on county land. So this property is 7 acres. One of the nicknames is the Triangle of Death because so many people have failed right here. You know, I took on the lease in 2015. I had been working on small parcels, got to spend a couple seasons on John Ellis's land just down the road. Really nice to get a piece of open space. So if you think about it, it was hayfield. This is all, used to be swamp drain tiles throughout this whole area. And there's a drain tile that circles pretty much the entire farm and then goes across the street to left hand. And I went into looking at all the Google stuff and went to the NRCS to look at their maps, and you know, you could always see green spots or, you know, fallow spots. And so the tiles throughout these properties are starting to fail, and that one has been a real struggle for me. So there's been a lot impacting this soil. When I started Kilt Farm, you know, it's certified organic. I really wanted to try to grow the most nutrient-dense food possible. I come at it from a food perspective. Originally in the restaurant world, that was my first degree. I had a lot of freedom to come up with new concepts and ideas and really try it out here. Did a lot of study through Acres USA, pretty progressive farming organization. And I was actually, Kilt Farm was born 2013 over at the Shepherd Valley Waldorf School. They had a small farmer training center, lasted a couple of years. I was the only graduate. And their idea was to get farmers trained up to go out on open space. And so, you know, I realized that the soil is really depleted. I took soil tests, really low in trace minerals, you know, high in magnesium. You could just see that the soil was locking up. And so I wanted to do an experiment of putting down sea salt. C90 is the product. I read some books about the value of sea salt. You know, you think about really productive areas, there's bird poop, they're dropping fish, you know, the salmon areas in the Northwest. So man, I got so much pushback when I said I want to do some bands of sea salt, you know, 1,000 pounds an acre, 500 pounds an acre. And he's like, that's what the Romans did to kill the ground. So you can see there was some pushback on that. But, you know, the experiment went great. The highest concentration of sea salt performed the best. First spring flush did really well, and then everything caught up, you know. So kind of bringing that attitude here to the farm of trying different things. Compost tea has always been a big component of my operation. My first farm infrastructure piece was a 60-gallon compost tea brewer. And you know, I get my compost from Vermont Compost. I bring in semi-loads of their potting soil and compost for different farmers around the county, and it's phenomenal stuff. So, you know, we're really brewing and utilizing tea throughout all of the properties, including the hayfield at least once a year. And it's because biology is really weak. The soils, you know, on this ground, when I took it over, just weak. And for the production that I'm doing, I'm wanting the ground to be able to give me at least maybe 3 successions throughout the year. So we're tilling, disking, doing bed prep, flipping crops, doing it again, you know, really trying to maximize the space we have. And so for myself, I've been trying to really earn the right to till. And so the biology is really important for me. You know, I found some cool soil inoculants that go into the field. And it's kind of amazing. You can pick up a sandbag and it's just mycelium. You think it's weed roots, and then within 15 minutes they're just gone from the sun hitting it. So I've really seen good responses in that. And I can kind of tweak the compost tea. We use it as foliar spray. We use it as fertigation. So it's quite active. Um, FSMA doesn't like it, but you know, I'm small enough where I don't have to worry about that. I feel comfortable using it on food crops. Never had any issues. Some of the other things we've been doing here is really trying to balance the soil. You know, right away, a lot of soil testing, and it was interesting because with all the different methods, farming methods, one guy was compost. He was just compost, 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 and the potassium in his little section was off the hook. So it took me a while to really start to balance out all of that to have one management unit here. But doing a lot of soil testing, a lot of mineral mending, we're heavy, heavy magnesium. So it's just the soil locks up. We're sandy clay loam and clay loam. So, you know, last year was just brutal for us because, you know, we had 20 plus inches of rain here and there's just enough slope where it would just all flood down and then lock up. So a real hard production year. And you know, my water has lots of magnesium, so I'm always applying magnesium to the soil and it just keeps locking up. So we've been really focused on liming the soil, even though my pH is high. I mean, we're putting down tons of lime per acre, tons of gypsum per acre, with then trace minerals and boron, copper, you know, a full gamut to try to get my soil to be really highly productive. And it's a lot of money and it's a lot of time, but we've been able to get to a point that when it's all running well, you know, some of my ground can average $70,000 to $90,000 of revenue an acre. So there is some space in there to be able to do some of this to build long-term soil vitality and really get it productive. You know, because if I can really boost my yield on the peppers and eggplants and tomatoes, you know, really it can help boost revenue. And so this year I'm managing 50 acres between this property and the neighboring property. This is JRCC and the Chandler open space. Last year I was at 80 acres, including a parcel and gun barrel that I let go of. And that was just like taking so much weight off my shoulders because it had a lot of challenges, even more than both of these combined. And I was lucky enough to get some soil health grants from the county. So Dean Chandler, who owned the property next door, dug ponds and tapped into drain tiles to fill his ponds. And you know, he passed last year at, they didn't really know how old he was, 90, 91, 92. And for a long time he had just hayed the fields and put horses on. Didn't really do anything, so I was added no amendments, no fertilizer for probably a decade. So it was easy for me to flip that into organic, but it really wasn't very productive ground. So I took out probably 8 of the 40 and turned it into vegetable production, and which was fascinating because you really don't know what you get until you flip the soil. And I didn't know that I got a lot of broken drain tiles under that, and we found it last year with all that rain. Water was just surfacing up. So super impacted by water. The drain tiles had been leaching and pushing water to the surface for probably decades, so a lot of salination, a lot of compaction, and you know, my idea was great, that's my summer field, I can rotate all my summer crops through there, and it was just brutal because you know, I'd have let's say a row of peppers and it looked good at the east end, and then you could watch it just drop down and struggle and then pop back up as it, you know, passed that salination point or compacted point or high magnesium. And so this year, with the help of the soil health grant, we were able to go out there and really add, you know, especially with the help of John Brown, thank you sir, with all the soil testing and advising, you know, we were able to put down compost, but more importantly, tons of calcium per acre, tons of gypsum per acre, soil biological treatments, which were really helpful. And Andy Brighter has been bringing in his cattle, and we've been bale feeding his cattle right on top of those vegetable beds, so building organic matter and biology. So this year we're seeing, especially because I focused on those salinated spots and we managing the tile water better, much more consistent, really great production out there. And then the hay field, my first year haying it, I helped Dean irrigate it for a few years when he was getting old. But my first year haying it, I think I had max 10 tons, 12 tons on 18 acres. So less than a ton an acre. And we went out and really did a heavy trace mineral application, limed it, heavy gypsum, heavy compost, and then aerated it. And over the years, I've been doing foliar treatments on the hay to try to really build biology, get the plants as healthy as possible. And my first cutting this year was 20 tons, and we're really geared up to hopefully do the same in the second cutting, possibly get enough regrowth where they can graze the ground. So it was really nice seeing such a good response with these applications and really see it happen. I mean, it was super expensive. It was probably, all of that was probably 30 grand. And I wouldn't, with no way could I afford to do that without the soil health grant, because the return on investment is just too long. I don't have that much capital, but thank you, Boulder County. Because now hopefully that's going to be really productive for a while. And then the last thing is I do a lot of cover cropping. It's super intensive production with 2 to 3 successions a year. I beat the hell out of the ground. I'm tilling it, I'm irrigating it, I'm working it. So I've been trying to move cover around the farm about 20% a year in different sections, depending on is it weak? Am I seeing pest pressure? Am I seeing weed pressure? And with last year, I have the max of about 8 to 9 if I push it productive acres on these two properties. And right now I'm in 2 acres of year-on-year cover. So we've been doing, I'll start a cover cycle in the fall, grow it, flail mow it, incorporate it, a summer cover, flail mow it, incorporate it, and another fall-winter cover, and then terminate it the next year. So I've got about 18 months of just cover, and then I really start to see a good response in the ground. So trying to earn the right to beat the shit out of the soil, because that's what vegetable production does. It's really hard on the ground. And I've been using multi-speciated covers, using Pawnee Buttes for the most part. Right now I've got a sorghum pea foxtail millet succession cover, and in the winter it's peas, vetch, triticale. We'll put out stuff that I'm not going to be growing on. We'll go for buckwheat just to keep something growing as much as possible. And because right on the highway, everybody sees what I do, and my landlords drive by all the time. I try to, do a good job. I'm also a Virgo, so I keep it neat and tidy. So, wondering if anybody's got any questions about my practices.
I have a question. So I'm just going. This is like verbiage issue. We say cover crop, and I view like a cover crop as something you put in between the crop you want and the dead time.
Yeah.
The time. So if you're leaving it, you said like 12 to 18 months.
Yep.
And then you put it under. Would that be considered like a sacrificial crop?
Well, I consider it a cover crop because I go through just that life cycle. So I don't let it go to seed, hopefully. So I'm just growing it specifically to flail mow it and incorporate it.
But you're trying to grow a crop where everything kind of helps each other out to grow a crop, and then you want to put it back in the ground for the nutrients. So I view that as like a sacrificial crop.
Oh yeah, totally.
Instead of growing, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's not a cash crop.
Yeah, you're growing. You're basically taking a plot of land that you would have a cash crop on,
Right.
and you're sacrificing it to the ground.
Yeah.
Where I feel like we sometimes when we say cover crop, I view a cover crop as something you put on in the dead time when your cash crop isn't growing.
Right.
Just to keep the
And so for
ground
you,
alive.
that would be putting something interseeded in the corn. So when the
Yeah.
corn is harvested, it can come up over the off time. But with vegetable production, there is no off time. You know, I have to specifically take that out and say I'm not going to grow it.
You'd have a sacrificial crop then.
Sure.
Kind of,
Yeah.
in a way.
People understand cover crop. You start talking about sacrificial crops, they're very confused. Cover cropping is confusing enough. Well, it's something I inherited, and you know, we have for a while there. I was using a micronized soft rock phosphate, and it doesn't leach out, it doesn't move. So there was probably some over application when I first started. So you know, growing the vegetable crops, they're going to pull phosphorus up, and for the most part, the crops are leaving the farm, right? And that's taking the phosphorus out. In my high tunnel, I have high phosphorus levels, and instead of reincorporating the tomato matter, you know, we'll pull that out and compost it. So that's, you know, growing it out is probably my best bet. Well, my compost is manure based, so donkey manure from Vermont Compost. They also have plant waste in their compost, really rich. So if you're making a good compost, right, you've got bacteria and fungi in there, and when I put it in the brewer, you know, the bubbling action of the brewer is doing nothing but knocking the biology off the soil, or the, yeah, we call it soil aggregate, or the aggregates in the compost. And then I'm feeding it with molasses and kelp and sea salt. So my idea is really brewing up as much biology as possible. And you know, I have kids come through from Boulder Valley to do tours because they're learning about compost. And I pull a bucket and let them stick their head in it, and it smells earthy, you know, like the forest floor. This is Boulder County open space. I am not blessed with anything like that, so I use it, I clean the tank, I brew again, you know, or I can keep brewing for a little while, but you know, biofilms build up. I don't want it to go anaerobic, so I like to use it all, get it out there, and start from scratch. Yeah, yeah. And then I also do soil inoculant, which is a mix of biology, both fungal and bacterial, more fungal, that I put out in my irrigation. So, and that's listed with all the different components of bacteria and fungi. You go around the corner after we're done. I've got a vortex brewer. So basically, it's a tank with like I call it a bubble elevator. So there are tubes coming from the bottom up to the top of the tank, and it's using compressed air, just air pump, to with bubbles starting at the bottom of the hose. So that action starts to lift up the water and puts it in the top of the tank. So there's no blending or mechanical work. So it's just constantly circulating. And the nice thing about this, it won't go anaerobic because the action of pulling from the bottom and actually turning it up, and it's if you look at it, there's a cyclone that's spinning inside the tank all the time.
How long do you brew it for?
At least 24 hours. You know, this weather. Shit, if I started one last night, that water's hot. It's foamed over.
Do you also feed the microbes that are already in the soil, like sugars or anything like that?
Well, with the molasses, that has sugars in it. In the spring, we use John Kemp's AEA soil primer, and I do have molasses that we'll put in at times throughout the season if I want to really kick that up. But I try not to make the biology sugar junkies, so I really limit that. And my goal is to try to have really healthy, productive plants that are photosynthesizing like mad, and then they can pump the sugars into the soil. That would be my first goal.
How do
Yep.
you get rid of the excess potassium?
I just grew it out.
You just
Grew it out. Yeah. I haven't. I minimal compost applications. Probably I haven't done. Yeah, very minimal on this property. Just enough. You could barely find it on the ground for biology. And the compost teas don't have a ton of potassium in it. Where actually I'm putting potassium in my fertigation because I'm seeing weakness around the farm. So this past year was the year I used the most compost ever, but it was over probably 25 acres. So not much super great compost in Colorado. I haven't changed much. Um, Heavy applications of gypsum and calcium, and really watching that change my soil test. Watching my soils open up and be fluffy and easy to work. And there was a great example in the Chandler veg field. I had a section that the drain tile ruptured and created a spring and flooded out about an acre, and it stayed flooded for weeks and weeks and weeks. The salts were through the roof. And so we went really high. I think it was 3,000 pounds of lime per acre, and that was this spring. Yeah, I did a fall application and a spring application, and so I was out there prepping my fields, and there was another section. Half of the block, 2.5 acres, was at a much lower rate. And as I'm out there pulling my plastic layer, I noticed that the section of the field with the heavy applications of lime and gypsum, the plastic layer, there was almost no resistance in the soil, and it really, my lines were perfectly straight. I go 200 feet south, and there was just still so much chunkiness in the clay that it was pushing my tractor. And that was, for me, a really good evidence. I almost could find the line where we stopped that heavy application of calcium. But for the most part, I haven't added much in the way of amendments outside of what I've been doing for years, and soil testing and plant health, plant production, pest pressure. I'm seeing a lot less pest pressure throughout that whole field. I mean, I've seen Colorado potato beetles, I've seen Japanese beetles in my squashes. I've had years where it is just destroyed with cucumber beetles. I see them, they're really tiny, they're having no agronomic impact. So my plants are healthy. So that's really, I'm seeing we're moving in the right direction. Now, day to day, am I moving in the right direction? Am I getting a better yield? Do I have better plant health? Is my soil easier to work? So, it's shifting, which is cool. Well, my understanding is lime's going to drive up the pH, right? And the idea is where it's also going to push out magnesium and salt in that soil colloid. But with the gypsum, it does the same because there's calcium carbonate in it, but I'm also getting sulfur in the gypsum. And so if I can use the lime to really open up the soil colloid, and then we're good, my calcium is in the right ratios, I can use the gypsum with the sulfur, to help maintain that balance. Because the sulfur is going to drive down pH. And we've done that treatment also, and we've seen the pH come down a little bit. I'm about 7, 8 after heavy sulfur applications. I've seen it drop. but I'm not trying to get it down to a perfect pH. You know, if my plants are healthy, the pH in the rhizosphere is going to be what they need. You know, they can handle that. Yeah, we've been pulling it out of the peat lean mine. Is that right, John? Yeah, the peat lean mine up northwest of Fort Collins, and it's super fine. I borrow a drop spreader, an old drop spreader, and just make lines around the field, incorporate it, and it becomes really available quickly. So there are resources around for some of this stuff, which is great. So that field is pretty much plasticulture. In the fall, I'm not using plastic for all my brassicas and cole crops, my cabbages, cauliflowers. There needs to be a 120-day window from the last manure application until the harvest. And I think it's a little shorter, 90 days if the crop's not touching the ground. So all of that, you know, and y'all are more than welcome to walk out there. I mean, it's all on plastic and it's all up. And my certifier, I have OCIA, and they're just really a hardcore pain in the ass. So the certifier checks that. When was the last? So when did the cows leave? That was the last application, and when was the first harvest? So other than that, I feel pretty comfortable because we incorporate it. You know, get it going and then get it work. You won't find any, by the time we go in to make our beds, you won't find any manure. You might find hay, but no manure. Andy, how long are the cattle out there? 30 days. I mean, there's a lot of activity out there, but, you know, it's not like adding tons and tons of manure or tons and tons of compost per acre. Because that you can really overdo it. It's all super concentrated. I mean, they're putting their patties everywhere. So.
But manure is all hay-based, right?
Yeah, it's all grass-based. Yep. And it's nice. The ground. I'm seeing my organic matter go up, and it's really fantastic. Yeah. And my son loves it. He's always excited. He wants to go see the cows and feed them, and they jump around. He got scared, but he got over his fear. He loves the cattle. Yeah. Probably not. My wife would divorce me. Cool. Any other questions? And you know, I'm happy to chat with people as we have dinner.